finally reporting this week that there are, quote, reasonable grounds to believe Hamas committed rape, sexualized torture, and other cruel and inhumane treatment of women on October 7th. And according to one UN official, there is also, quote, reasonable grounds to believe that such violence may be ongoing. Now, this is literally something we've been reporting on this show since October, and our staff doesn't have the investigative access and capabilities, right, of the UN envoy focusing on sexual violence, right? They've now come to the conclusion that we and any fair brokers did more than 4 months ago. Joining us now in studio is a man we'd all become accustomed to seeing on our screens live from Israel, former IDF spokesperson Jonathan Conricus. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Thanks very much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So what is your reaction to the UN finally now making this statement about the use of sexual assault as a weapon of war here?
Too little, too late, and without any recommendations and nothing done about it. And as you said very clearly, you don't have to be an expert or a forensic analyst to understand that this is what Hamas did, and this is what they continue to do against Israeli hostages being held now for more than 150 days in Hamas captivity. So what is lacking here, and I think that this is yet another failure in a list of sad, unfortunate failures by UN institutions towards those who rely on their help. Women who are supposed to have special protection, and there are special UN institutions that are made in order to guarantee or to promote safety and protect women against sexual violence and conflict, were failed by this.
Yeah. Let me ask you about a potential pause, ceasefire, whatever you want to call it. It sounds like this is coming down to the fact that Hamas won't give names, right, of who the hostages are who are alive. At least that's a big issue. It seems ridiculous that that's what this is coming down to, but let's even assume that that's the case. Isn't it still in Israel's interest to try to move forward? Meaning, are the families, for example, of the hostages saying, yes, let's draw a hard line here. If they don't give us the names, then we ought to not make any sort of deal?
That is not what it's about. That is just a mere front. The real situation is that Hamas understands that they have this big of amount of international pressure on Israel, and they feel confident to make outlandish demands and basically to try to get Israel to stop the war in order to get part of the hostages back. They're, I think, assessing the political situation in the US and the tensions between Washington and Jerusalem, and they are emboldened by the situation, and that is why they are making non-starter demands to begin with that they know that Israel cannot meet. Israel isn't going to end the war in order to get a few of the hostages back. Israel has to defeat Hamas, and Israel wants to get the hostages back. And it's not about a list of who's alive and who isn't.
But you mentioned the tension between the U.S. and Israel. And, you know, the U.S., despite the fact that there's dissent within the U.S. about exactly what the government should do, has been very supportive of Israel. And doesn't that make Israel say, hey, you know what? Maybe a good faith actor like the U.S. saying to us, this isn't, you know, this can't keep going in this way, that maybe Israel should shift gears?
You know, the relations between Israel and the U.S. are long-lasting, they're solid, they're great. There's political tensions, which I think have been reported about a lot, but bottom line is the gap between what Israel can do and accept and what Hamas are demanding, it's simply too big. Hamas are basically doing a last Hail Mary attempt at ending the war, staying alive, by using the hostages. And that's something that Israel cannot accept, because at the beginning of this war, in response to Hamas attacks, the clear goal is, and this is supported by the Biden administration as well, is to defeat Hamas and make sure that they no longer will rule the Gaza Strip. If we stop now, if the war is ended with a 6 weeks or perhaps longer ceasefire, Hamas wins. And that's not something that is going to happen.
Speaking of winning, I mean, Yahya Sinwar, who was maybe the architect of October 7th, has been hiding in tunnels. The IDF released video of him from shortly after October 7th. they seem to know basically where he is at this point, right? Surrounded by civilians. How much risk is Israel willing to take to get him?
I think that had Israel known exactly where he is, he wouldn't have been alive today. But there have
even if he's surrounded by civilians?
No, we also know that there were instances where we had probable good information about where he was, but unfortunately we also had indications that he was surrounded by live Israeli hostages.
Right.
And that is probably what saved him then. But, you know, he has to be right every time. We only have to be right once, and we will get him. His days are counted.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.